A hand reaches for a grenade pin. The metal is warm from the jungle heat, slick with sweat. The hand belongs to a man who has 10 seconds left to live, though he doesn't know the exact number. He knows only that the number is small. This is not where the story begins, but it's where everything leads. The story begins in Surry Hills, Sydney, on March 13, 1937. A third child enters the world in a working-class household where Raymond Wheatley works as a cleaner and labourer, where his wife Ivy manages a home with the kind of economy that comes from understanding that nothing is guaranteed and everything must be stretched to cover more than it should. According to records maintained by the Australian War Memorial, the boy receives a name that carries no particular poetry: Kevin Arthur Wheatley. Just a name. The kind working-class parents give their sons when they expect those sons to work with their hands and come home at the end of each day with dirt under their fingernails and stories they don't tell. Raymond Wheatley has stories he doesn't tell. He served in World War II with the 2nd 9th Army Field Regiment, a gunner lobbing shells toward enemies he never saw, contributing to a victory celebrated in newspapers while the actual cost, the specific texture of fear, the particular weight of wondering whether the next shell has your name on it, remained locked in whatever place men store such things. Young Kevin grows up in streets where rugby is the closest thing to war that most boys will know. He develops speed. Not the kind of speed you train for, but the kind you're born with and then sharpen through repetition until it becomes instinct. His teammates start calling him Dasher. According to testimony gathered from former rugby mates and preserved in biographical collections, the nickname comes from his ability to break through defensive lines with an explosive combination of power and agility. The name sticks. Years later, men who serve with him in jungles 9,000 miles from Sydney will know him only as Dasher, never knowing it came from a game played on grass fields where the stakes were pride and bragging rights rather than survival. At Maroubra Junction Junior Technical School, Kevin learns the practical subjects designed to prepare working-class boys for working-class lives. Metalwork, basic mathematics, the kind of education that assumes you'll use your hands more than your head, and that this is simply the natural order of things. As documented in Department of Veterans Affairs biographical records, he leaves school and works a series of jobs: milk carter, food sterilizer, machine operator, brick burner. The jobs share a common characteristic. They require showing up, doing what you're told, going home, repeating. On July 20th, 1954, 17-year-old Kevin Wheatley marries 14-year-old Edna Davis at the Registrar General's office in Sydney. She uses her stepfather's surname, Gimson, for the ceremony. According to family accounts preserved in memorial archives, they met when Kevin delivered milk to the milk bar where Edna worked. The detail is almost painfully ordinary. A milk delivery, a girl behind a counter, the kind of meeting that happens 10,000 times a day in 10,000 places without anyone thinking it remarkable. Except this one leads to a marriage, to 4 children, to a widow at 25 raising those children alone. But that comes later. In 1956, Kevin Wheatley makes a decision that will determine the trajectory of every day he has left. On June 12th, at age 19, as noted in official Australian Army enlistment records, he walks into a recruitment office and signs papers that transform him from civilian to soldier. The Australian Regular Army absorbs him into its machinery. Basic training strips away the individual and builds something else. Not a different person exactly, but a different version of the same person. One calibrated to operate within hierarchies and follow orders and understand that some things matter more than your own comfort or preference or survival. He's assigned to the 4th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment. Then, in March 1957, transfer to the 3rd Battalion. According to military service records documented by the Australian War Memorial, By September 1957, he's shipping out to Malaya, where Britain is fighting a war. It doesn't call a war because emergency sounds better in newspapers and parliamentary debates. The Malayan Emergency. Even the name is a lie, but it's the lie everyone agrees to tell. Between 1948 and 1960, British and Commonwealth forces fight communist guerrillas in jungle terrain that offers every possible advantage to defenders who know the ground and every possible disadvantage to soldiers who don't. The Australians who serve there develop doctrines that will become legendary in military circles. Jungle patrol techniques, contact drills designed to give soldiers split-second advantages when ambushes erupt. The art of moving through terrain where every sound announces your presence, and silence becomes a skill as important as marksmanship. Wheatley spends from September 1957 to July 1959 in that green hell, learning lessons that cannot be taught in classrooms. According to operational records from the 3rd Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, he absorbs the knowledge that separates soldiers who survive from soldiers who don't. Not the grand strategic understanding of how battles connect to campaigns, but the specific practical knowledge of how to read terrain, how to move without making the mistakes that get you killed, how to lead men who are as frightened as you are but need to believe you're not. When he returns to Australia in August 1959, transferring to the 2nd Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, he carries with him a competence that his superiors recognize. Another transfer in June 1961, this time to the 1st Battalion. The Army moves its pieces around the board, preparing for a war nobody can quite see coming, but everybody suspects is inevitable. January 1964 brings promotion to sergeant. According to personnel records, the promotion reflects not just competence, but a quality harder to quantify: the ability to make other soldiers want to follow you. One of his men, David Munday, would later tell interviewers from the Australian War Memorial, "He was an extraordinary man's man. He just had a way with the guys, and when he walked into a room, his presence drew your attention." Presence. The word captures something real but imprecise. Some men have it. Most don't. It's not about being the loudest or the biggest or the most aggressive. It's about a kind of gravitational pull, a quality that makes other men orient themselves around you without anyone explicitly deciding that's what's happening. August 1964 brings another promotion. Warrant Officer, Class 2. The timing matters. Half a world away, a country most Australians couldn't locate on a map is fragmenting into a conflict that will define the next decade. Vietnam. The name already carries weight in 1964, though the full measure of that weight remains to be discovered. The Australian Army Training Team Vietnam, AATTV, or simply the team to those who serve in it, begins arriving in South Vietnam in July and August 1962. As documented in official histories compiled by the Department of Veterans Affairs, the initial deployment consists of 30 men, all officers and warrant officers, commanded by Colonel F.P. Ted Sarong. Their mission combines diplomatic purpose with military function. Train and advise South Vietnamese forces, demonstrate international support for the American effort, maintain Australia's alliance relationship with the United States. The official designation is advisors. According to AATTV war diary entries from 1962 to 1964, maintained in Australian War Memorial archives, that designation becomes increasingly fictional as the months pass. Advisors are supposed to stay in rear areas, offering guidance and instruction while other people do the fighting. By late 1963, AATTV members are accompanying South Vietnamese units on combat operations. By mid-1964, the restriction on advisors taking part in combat is officially lifted, which is just bureaucracy acknowledging what everyone already knows. When bullets start flying, The distinction between advisor and combatant exists only on paper. The first AATTV casualty occurs on June 1, 1963. According to official casualty records, Sergeant William Francis Hacking is accidentally killed while on duty. Accidents count. The jungle doesn't care about intentions. The first advisor officially killed in action is Warrant Officer Class 2, Kevin Conway, who dies at the Battle of Nam Dong on July 6, 1964. As noted in combat reports from that engagement, Conway dies fighting beside Master Sergeant Gabriel Alamo of the U.S. Special Forces during a sustained Viet Cong attack on the camp. The team expands. 60 personnel in June 1964, 100 by December. As documented in Australian Army organisational records, the expansion reflects the escalating commitment of Australian forces to a war that Prime Minister Robert Menzies will publicly commit combat troops to in April 1965, telling Parliament on April 29th that Australia will send an infantry battalion to Vietnam. Kevin Wheatley arrives in Vietnam in March 1965. He's 28 years old. His eldest child, George, is 11. His youngest daughters are still young enough that they'll barely remember what their father's voice sounded like. His first posting sends him to Quang Tri Province, according to AATTV assignment records. He's attached to the 1st Battalion, 1st Regiment, 1st Army of the Republic of Vietnam Division. His platoon commander is United States Marine Corps Lieutenant Jim Lowe, who will later describe Wheatley to military interviewers as a prankster with an exceptional grasp of counterinsurgency warfare. The work is what he trained for, teaching South Vietnamese soldiers how to fight in terrain they were born in, but haven't learned to use tactically. The irony of foreigners teaching natives how to operate in their own country is not lost on anyone, but irony doesn't change the job. According to operational reports from the 1st ARVN Division, dated May 1965, Wheatley demonstrates the kind of leadership that translates across language barriers. Leadership through example rather than exhortation. On May 28, 1965, that leadership manifests in a way that official reports struggle to categorize. During an action with ARVN regular troops, as documented in after-action reports preserved at the Australian War Memorial, a 3-year-old Vietnamese girl wanders into the crossfire. The reports don't explain how a toddler ended up in a combat zone. Such things happened with grim regularity in a war where front lines existed mainly in the imaginations of staff officers, drawing on maps. Wheatley sees the child, sees the danger, and runs into the killing zone without hesitation. He scoops up the girl and carries her to safety, using his own body as a shield. No award is given. Awards require specific categories, specific criteria, specific forms filled out by specific authorities. Rescuing enemy civilians, because that's what she technically is, this 3-year-old caught in someone else's war, doesn't fit the established categories. But the men who witness it understand they're seeing something essential about who Kevin Wheatley is beneath the rank and the training and the hard competence. August 1965 brings another action that should have resulted in recognition, but instead results in bureaucratic limbo. During an attack on a Viet Cong-held village, as reported in U.S. military advisor accounts from the engagement, Wheatley single-handedly carries an assault up a steep slope as VC forces withdraw. The senior U.S. advisor on scene recommends him for the Silver Star, America's 3rd highest military decoration. According to historical analyses of Australian military awards policy documented by military historians, the recommendation enters a bureaucratic maze created by Australian government policies regarding acceptance of foreign decorations. The paperwork will wander through filing systems for 56 years before finally, in December 2021, the Silver Star is presented to George Wheatley, a son receiving his father's medal more than 5 decades after the father performed the actions that earned it. September 1965 brings a transfer that will prove final. As noted in AATTV personnel movement orders, Wheatley is assigned to a team, part of the U.S. 5th Special Forces Group, operating under the command of Captain Felix Fazekas. According to correspondence preserved in Australian War Memorial collections, Fazekas himself carries a story that intersects with the broader currents of mid-century history. Born in Hungary, he arrived in Australia as a displaced person in 1949, part of the refugee wave that followed World War II's reshaping of European borders and political systems. He joined the Citizens Military Force in 1955, earned his commission in the Regular Army in 1959, and deployed to Vietnam in 1965. In letters written in Hungarian to Dr. Anthony Endry QC, a lawyer and fellow Hungarian expatriate, Fazekas notes that he's still fighting the Bolshevist hordes, just as he had as a teenage conscript in the Hungarian army during the war. Their area of operations is Tra Bong, in Quang Ngai province. A photograph dated November 1965, catalogued in Australian War Memorial visual collections under reference C64216, shows a team assembled for a group portrait. 12 men, mixture of Australians and Americans, squinting against sunlight that makes the jungle behind them look almost benign. Back row, third from left, Second Lieutenant Bussey, U.S. Special Forces. Third from right, Warrant Officer Kevin Wheatley. Far right, Warrant Officer Ron Butch Swanton. Front row, center, Captain Fazekas, Commander. Within days of the photograph being taken, Wheatley and Swanton will be dead, and Fazekas will be writing the after-action report that becomes the foundation for Australia's first Victoria Cross of the Vietnam War. Tra Bong exists as an isolated outpost in terrain that belongs more to the enemy than to Saigon. According to Special Forces operational summaries from late 1965, the camp is so remote that road access has been cut by Viet Cong forces, leaving only air resupply as a viable option. Photographs from the Australian War Memorial collection show the camp as a maze of communication trenches and bunkers, with advisors' quarters consisting of dugouts covered with waterproof material and positioned inside perimeter wire that marks the fragile boundary between controlled space and everything else. The advisors work with the Civil Irregular Defense Group, CIDG, primarily Montagnard tribesmen from the Central Highlands. As documented in CIA program evaluations of the CIDG initiative, developed in 1961, the program attempts to transform traditional village defense systems into paramilitary forces capable of contesting Viet Cong control. In practice, this means taking indigenous people with limited military training and sending them on search and destroy missions against an enemy that has been fighting in these mountains for generations. November 13th, 1965. The date appears in casualty reports, in award citations, in memorial records. It begins at approximately 1300 hours, 1 p.m. for those who don't think in military time. According to the official Victoria Cross citation published in the London Gazette on December 15, 1966, a CIDG company commences a search and destroy operation in the Tra Bong Valley, 15 kilometers east of the Special Forces camp. 15 kilometers, 9 miles. The distance could be covered in 2 hours on a road, if roads existed and if roads were safe, which they are neither. In jungle terrain against an enemy who might be anywhere or nowhere, 15 kilometers becomes a journey into uncertainty. The CIDG company moves in 3 platoons. Captain Fazekas accompanies the center platoon as senior advisor. Warrant officers Kevin Wheatley and Ron Swanton accompany the right-hand platoon. The formation makes tactical sense on paper. Spread your forces, cover more ground, maintain radio contact. On paper, everything makes sense. The terrain they move through offers the characteristics that make conventional military operations in Vietnam an exercise in frustration. Rice paddies that force movement into the open, tree lines that could conceal entire companies, the constant calculation of exposure versus cover. Radio traffic maintains the illusion of control. Position reports, confirmation of waypoints, the mechanical chatter that says everything is proceeding according to plan. At 13:40 hours, 20 minutes to 2, Wheatley's voice crackles across the radio net. According to the official citation, he reports contact with Viet Cong elements. The resistance increases in strength. What begins as sporadic fire escalates into something sustained and organized, and far more dangerous than a chance encounter with a small patrol. Finally, Wheatley requests assistance. Fazekas responds immediately, as documented in his after-action report preserved in Australian War Memorial Archives. He organizes the center platoon and personally leads them toward the contact area. He's fighting his way through when another radio transmission comes from Wheatley. Warrant Officer Swanton has been hit in the chest. Wheatley requests an airstrike and medical evacuation. Then the right platoon breaks. Military euphemisms exist to soften realities that cannot be softened. When official reports say a unit broke, what they mean is that men who had been maintaining military formation suddenly scattered, that cohesion dissolved into panic, that soldiers ran. According to the Victoria Cross citation, the right platoon broke in the face of heavy Viet Cong fire and began to scatter. The Viet Cong force is later estimated at more than a company, somewhere between 120 and 150 fighters pressing an attack against a platoon that numbers perhaps 30 or 40 CIDG troops and 2 Australian advisors. Ron Swanton lies in the open rice paddy, a bullet in his chest. The CIDG medical assistant reaches him first. According to testimony from Private Din Du, documented in after-action reports and later incorporated into historical analyses by military historians, the medic assesses the wound and delivers his professional judgment to Wheatley. Swanton is dying, no chance of recovery. The wound is mortal. This is the moment. This is where every tactical consideration, every survival instinct, every piece of training about how to operate when operations go wrong, points toward one obvious conclusion. Withdraw. Get yourself out. Swanton is beyond help. Staying means dying with him. Wheatley's response, as recorded in multiple official accounts, is immediate and unambiguous. He discards his radio, that technological umbilical cord to air support, to artillery, to evacuation, to the entire apparatus of modern warfare. The radio would slow him down. He needs both hands free. He begins dragging Swanton toward the tree line. 200 meters. According to the Victoria Cross citation, that's the distance from the exposed rice paddy to the comparative safety of a wooded area. Comparative. The word military reports use when they mean less immediately fatal, rather than safe. 200 meters while half carrying, half dragging a man who weighs what every adult man weighs when he becomes dead weight. 200 meters under heavy machine gun and automatic rifle fire. Private Din Du assists. According to his testimony, the volume of fire is so intense that survival seems impossible. They reach the wood line. Comparative safety, which means they're not immediately visible to every enemy fighter in the vicinity, but they're still surrounded, still cut off, still in a tactical situation with exactly one likely outcome. Private Din Du urges Wheatley to leave. According to multiple historical accounts citing Din Du's testimony, the Viet Cong are closing in. Later reports, as documented in HistoryNet's 2023 historical analysis, note the enemy approached to within 10 meters, 30 feet. Close enough to see faces. Close enough that there's no mistaking intent. Swanton is motionless, beyond help, beyond medicine or miracles. Every rational consideration points toward the same conclusion. Private Din Du makes the argument explicitly, leave the dying man. Save yourself. Wheatley refuses. This is where the story becomes something other than tactics or training or the mechanical processes of military operations. This is where a human being makes a choice that his Victoria Cross citation will later describe with careful understatement. He had the clear choice of abandoning a wounded comrade and saving himself by escaping through the dense timber, or of staying with Warrant Officer Swanton and thereby facing certain death. He deliberately chose the latter course. Deliberately. The word carries weight. This is not panic, not confusion, not the fog of war making decisions for you. Deliberate means conscious, means choosing with full knowledge of consequences. Private Din Du, understanding that nothing more can be done, withdraws. According to his testimony preserved in military records, his last sight of Kevin Wheatley is this: the Australian Warrant Officer, out of ammunition, holding one grenade in each hand. The pins are still in place. Wheatley is waiting. The Viet Cong are coming. And then Din Du is gone, running through the jungle, driven by the survival instinct that Wheatley has somehow overridden. The explosions come shortly after. 2 grenade detonations in rapid succession, the distinctive crump of fragmentation grenades at close range. Then several bursts of automatic weapons fire. Then silence. The bodies are recovered at first light, November 14th, 1965, according to Captain Fazekas' after-action report cited in official military casualty documentation. Both Kevin Wheatley and Ron Swanton are found dead from multiple gunshot wounds. The Viet Cong shot them multiple times at close range. They made certain. What the grenades accomplished remains unrecorded. Whether Wheatley inflicted casualties on the approaching enemy, whether the grenades represented final defiance or desperate hope of taking some of them along. The after-action reports don't specify enemy casualties from that specific engagement. What matters is not the tactical outcome, but the choice that preceded it. The bureaucracy of military death follows its established patterns. According to Australian War Memorial historical records, fellow advisors around the Oid Corps organize a collection when they hear about Wheatley and Swanton's deaths. Lieutenant Jim Lowe, Wheatley's former platoon commander, leads the effort. They raise enough money to pay for the return of the bodies to Australia and to establish a trust fund for Wheatley's 4 children. The need for private funding reveals an uncomfortable truth. In 1965, the Australian government does not fund the return of service personnel who die overseas. That policy will change in 1966, but the change comes too late for Wheatley and Swanton, whose bodies come home through the generosity of American soldiers who understood what it means to leave men behind. Edna Wheatley receives the news the way military widows have always received such news. Uniformed officers at the door, faces arranged in expressions that try to be both professional and sympathetic, words that attempt to soften what cannot be softened. According to testimony from her son George, published in Victoria Cross Online magazine in 2024, the moment is seared into his memory. I was playing in the backyard with my 3 younger sisters when our life took a dramatic turn. Mum, who had just commenced a new job, came through the side gate followed by an army padre and another army person. I knew immediately something was wrong. Mum brought us all together, hugged us and said, "Your dad isn't coming home, he has been killed." George Wheatley is 11 years old. His father had promised to bring him a radio from Vietnam. Kevin Wheatley was due home on leave in 10 days. According to family accounts documented in memorial collections, the radio had already been purchased. It would arrive months later with Wheatley's personal effects. A transistor radio representing a promise kept by a dead man to a son who would have traded every radio in the world for one more conversation. The funeral takes place with full military honours at Pine Grove Memorial Park in Minchinbury, Western Sydney. According to Australian War Memorial photographic records, the coffins are draped with Australian flags. Soldiers stand at attention. A Vietnamese colonel pins decorations onto both coffins: the Knight's Badge of the National Order of Vietnam, the Military Merit Medal, the Gallantry Cross with palm. Medals for men who will never wear them. George Wheatley attends his father's funeral. His sisters, deemed too young to cope, do not. In testimony published decades later, George recalls standing next to his father's coffin on a gun carriage, but remembers little else. "I've blocked it out of my memories. I remember passing an army base and people lining the streets for miles saluting." What he remembers more clearly comes later, attending school where older children tell him his father was a murderer. The Vietnam War by late 1965 has become a source of profound division in Australian society. According to historical analyses by the National Museum of Australia, Prime Minister Menzies' decision to commit combat troops sparked opposition that intensified as casualties mounted. Young men conscripted under the National Service Scheme were being sent to fight in a war many Australians questioned. The same courage that military institutions held up as exemplary struck others as participation in something unjust. The Victoria Cross recommendation enters bureaucratic channels where politics and protocol intersect. According to historical analyses of the award process documented by military historians, the situation creates controversy. Australia in 1965 still operates under the system of British Imperial Military Awards, which requires final approval from the British government. Britain has refused to support America's war in Vietnam. Awarding Britain's highest military decoration for actions in a war the British oppose creates diplomatic complications. But some acts of courage transcend politics. After bureaucratic deliberation that takes more than a year, the award is approved. The London Gazette on December 15, 1966, publishes the citation. Warrant Officer Wheatley displayed magnificent courage in the face of an overwhelming Viet Cong force, which was later estimated at more than a company. He had the clear choice of abandoning a wounded comrade and saving himself by escaping through the dense timber, or of staying with Warrant Officer Swanton and thereby facing certain death. He deliberately chose the latter course. His acts of heroism, determination, and unflinching loyalty in the face of the enemy will always stand as examples of the true meaning of valor. On February 21, 1967, according to ceremonial records maintained by Government House, Governor-General Lord Casey presents the Victoria Cross to George Wheatley at a ceremony in Canberra. The medal, bronze forged from cannons captured at Sevastopol during the Crimean War, suspended from a crimson ribbon, is placed in the hands of a 12-year-old boy who understands everything and nothing about why his father died. The Australia that receives this news is not united. The divisions that will define the Vietnam War era are already appearing. Some see Wheatley as a hero. Some see him as a victim of an unjust war. Some see him as both. The complexity cannot be reconciled, only endured by those who carry the weight of it. Captain Felix Fazekas, who wrote the after-action report that became the foundation for the Victoria Cross recommendation, receives the Military Cross for his actions on November 13th. According to Australian War Memorial correspondence collections, Fazekas continues serving with AATTV until 1966, then returns to Australia, where he remains in the Army until his death in 1998 at age 69. In his letters from Vietnam, he expresses satisfaction at still fighting communism, still opposing the same ideology he had fought as a teenage conscript in Hungary during World War II. The Australian Army Training Team Vietnam continues operations for another 7 years. According to official Australian War Memorial Unit histories, AATTV remains in Vietnam until December 18, 1972, making it the longest-serving Australian unit of the conflict. It will earn distinction as Australia's most highly decorated unit of the war, with 4 Victoria Crosses awarded: Wheatley in 1966, Warrant Officer Richard Norden in 1968 for actions in 1968, Warrant Officer Rayeen Simpson in 1969 for actions in 1969, and Warrant Officer Keith Payne in 1969 for actions in 1969. But Wheatley was the first Australian vice of Vietnam, the first to prove that this war could still produce the kind of valor that military institutions had celebrated for generations. Physical artifacts remain. The stadium at the 1st Australian Support Compound in Vung Tau is named in Wheatley's honour. His Victoria Cross, donated to the Australian War Memorial in 1993, sits on display in the Hall of Valour. His Colt M1911A1 pistol, catalogued in the memorial's collection, has transformed from functional tool to historical relic. The objects persist while the man who used them fades into the particular kind of immortality that comes from dying young in service of something larger. In 2024, nearly 60 years after the events that cost him his life, Kevin Wheatley receives additional recognition. According to Commonwealth of Australia, government notices, Gazette dated October 28, 2024, he is posthumously awarded the Medal for Gallantry for acts of gallantry while serving as an advisor to the Army of the Republic of Vietnam during 1965. The citation specifically notes his actions on August 18, 1965, when he led a charge up a slope under attack, allowing his battalion to continue its assault and successfully rout the enemy. The recognition arrives too late to mean anything to Wheatley, too late even for most who knew him. But it reflects something about how nations process their military histories. Slowly, bureaucratically, decades after the immediacy fades and the certainties dissolve into more complicated questions. George Wheatley grows up carrying his father's legacy. In his account published in Victoria Cross Online, he describes the weight of growing up as the son of Australia's first Vietnam Vat C recipient. The media attention, the public ceremonies, the cognitive dissonance of being told his father was a hero, while classmates called him a murderer. He describes his mother Edna's struggle to raise 4 children alone, to navigate public attention she never sought, to carry grief that had no endpoint. The transistor radio Kevin Wheatley purchased for his son becomes an object of almost unbearable significance, a cheap piece of electronics that represents a father's promise, delivered from beyond death. George Wheatley keeps it for years, a physical connection to a man who becomes increasingly distant as memory fades and new experiences accumulate, and the 11-year-old who lost his father becomes a man with his own children who never knew their grandfather. The last photograph of Kevin Wheatley shows him in Vietnam with A-Team, November 1965, catalogued in the Australian War Memorial's collection under reference C64216. He stands in the back row, wearing jungle fatigues that are neither crisp nor particularly dirty, just the working uniform of a soldier doing his job. His face shows neither the fierce determination of propaganda nor the haunted exhaustion of trauma. He looks like what he was, a professional soldier in a place where professionalism carried lethal stakes. 3 days after that photograph was taken, he was dead at age 28. The Tra Bong Valley continued to be contested throughout the Vietnam War. Other battles would be fought there, larger operations, more strategically significant engagements. But November 13, 1965, remains significant as the day Australia discovered that this war, like all wars before it, would demand the same ancient price paid in blood and grief and widows and children growing up without fathers. What does it mean to display magnificent courage or demonstrate unflinching loyalty. The words appear in official citations, bureaucratic language trying to capture something that resists being reduced to words. Courage is not the absence of fear, but action despite it. Loyalty is not blind obedience, but conscious choice made in full awareness of cost. Kevin Wheatley understood that staying with Ron Swanton meant death. The math was simple. The Viet Cong were meters away. He was out of ammunition. The CIDG platoon had scattered. No reinforcements were arriving in time. Survival required one thing: run. He didn't run. He pulled the pins from 2 grenades and waited for an enemy that was already there. The image transcends the specific incident. It becomes something archetypal. The warrior in his final moment, stripped of options, reduced to binary simplicity. Live or die with honor. The choice that reveals who you are when everything else has been burned away. Private Din Du's testimony provides the only eyewitness account of those final moments. According to his statement preserved in military records, he watched Wheatley pull the grenade pins and then withdrew, driven by the survival instinct that Wheatley had somehow mastered. Din Du heard the explosions, heard the gunfire, then silence. What Wheatley thought in those last seconds remains unknown. Whether he prayed, whether he thought of Edna and the 4 children waiting in Sydney, whether he thought of the radio he'd purchased for George, whether he thought of anything at all beyond the tactical problem of 2 grenades and enemies closing in, and a friend lying dead or dying beside him. The military mind wants to believe he died inflicting casualties, that the grenades served tactical purpose beyond defiance. But the after-action reports don't confirm enemy losses from that specific engagement. What remains confirmed is the choice. A man who could have lived choosing to die rather than abandon a mate. In 2024, researchers and family members continue to preserve and share Wheatley's story. According to memorial organizations and historical societies, his sacrifice is invoked in military education as an example of mateship, that particularly Australian concept that combines loyalty and egalitarianism and refusal to abandon those who stand beside you. But reducing it to national characteristics misses something essential. This was not an Australian refusing to leave a mate, though he was Australian and Swanton was his mate. This was a human being making a choice that transcended nationality and doctrine, and every carefully constructed military value system. This was someone deciding that life on certain terms was worse than death on others. The grenade in each hand becomes an image that persists across decades. It appears in memorial artwork, in historical accounts, in the imagination of anyone who tries to understand what happened in that clearing. 2 grenades, 2 hands, 2 choices that aren't really choices at all because one of them is unthinkable. Edna Wheatley lived as a widow for decades after Kevin's death, raising their children, attending memorial ceremonies, carrying a grief that official recognitions could acknowledge but never address. The trust fund established by American advisors helped with expenses but couldn't replace a husband, couldn't give her children their father back, couldn't undo. November 13th, 1965. The question that haunts every story of extraordinary sacrifice is not what happened. The facts are documented in official records and medal citations. But why? Why does one man run while another stays? Why does the survival instinct, the most powerful and ancient of biological imperatives, get overridden by loyalty to a dying comrade? Military psychologists have studied this. According to research documented in psychological and military journals analyzing combat behavior, soldiers in close-knit units sometimes develop bonds stronger than self-preservation. Training creates muscle memory. Combat creates something deeper, a transformation where the unit becomes more important than the individual. where abandoning a wounded mate represents a death of identity more terrifying than physical death. But academic explanations circle around mystery rather than penetrating it. Kevin Wheatley had every reason to live. 4 children, a wife, home leave in 10 days. The CIDG medic told him Swanton was dying. Private Dindu urged him to withdraw. Every rational consideration screamed the same message. Save yourself. He pulled the pins from 2 grenades and waited. Perhaps Ron Swanton could have explained it, but Swanton was dying in the mud, beyond words, beyond everything except the presence of a man who refused to let him die alone. The Australian War Memorial's Roll of Honour lists both names side by side. 2 98909 Warrant Officer Class, 2 Kevin Arthur Wheatley, VC, and Warrant Officer Ronald James Butch Swanton. They are separated only by the bureaucratic distinction that one received the Victoria Cross and one did not, a division that meant everything to citation writers and nothing to 2 men lying together in a jungle clearing. The story does not end with medals or citations or memorial ceremonies. It ends in that clearing, with a hand reaching for a grenade pin. The metal is warm from jungle heat, slick with sweat. The hand belongs to a man who has seconds left to live. He pulls the pin. And in that moment, everything about Kevin Arthur Wheatley, the rugby player from Surry Hills, the milk carter who married young, the father of 4, the soldier who ran into crossfire to save a child, the warrant officer who refused to leave his dying mate, is distilled into one simple truth. Some things matter more than survival. The grenades detonate, the guns fire. Silence follows, and the story that began in a working-class Sydney suburb on March 13, 1937, ends in a jungle clearing 9,000 miles from home on November 13, 1965. 28 years, 8 months. Not long enough. Never long enough. But long enough to matter.